Okay, lovely. Welcome to King's Cross. My name's James. I work for the Field Studies Council, and what I'll be doing today is doing some field work around regeneration in the area. But before we kind of crack into the field work and actually doing our primary data collection, what we need to do is think about what is regeneration, why is regeneration needed, and why did King's Cross actually get regenerated. So the first thing I'd like to think about is kind of what is regeneration. So regeneration is about changing the area. It involves re-imaging, rebranding, and actually some physical changes. And what we'll do throughout today is we'll actually look at how the area has been re-imaged, how it's been rebranded, and some of the physical regeneration that has actually happened in this area. So that is kind of what we're going to be doing, and we'll be looking at a variety of different primary data collection techniques, and also talking about secondary data collection as well. We'll be looking at both qualitative and quantitative techniques to try and get a big picture of what's going on. We should really start with the background of King's Cross. So what I'd like to do is just think about kind of what do we already know about King's Cross. So if I was to ask most people, kind of your age, my age, what we think about King's Cross is kind of Harry Potter. That's the one thing people think of, is the Harry Potter books, platform 9 3/4, and that is how it's referred to in literature. But if you were to ask people a little bit older, that's not the memory or the understanding they would have of King's Cross. It used to historically be a very, very different place. In fact, I've got kind of some representations of King's Cross here, and I've got a passage from Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which you'll all know, so I'm not going to read that one to you. You'll know that off by heart, I'm sure. But I have also got a poem from 1915 about St Pancras Station, which is just next to King's Cross. It's one long sweet kiss pressed close upon my lips, one moment's rest on your swift beating heart, and all was over, for the hour had come for us to part. A sudden forward motion of the train, the world grown dark although the sun still shone, one last blurred look through aching tear-dimmed eyes, and you were gone. So there's two meanings we can get to that from that poem from 1915. One is about what this area was all about, and as we said, we've got St Pancras Station and King's Cross Station, and the real background to this area is transport. You've got two major railway links coming in, you've got canals, which we'll look at a bit later, and that has meant that this area historically has been a big site for industry. But also, it talks a little bit about kind of fleeting times with people, and touches a bit on a moment on lips and things like that, and that also indicates some of the other activities that maybe took place in King's Cross that were less than desirable. So this area was known as an area that was quite rough, quite run down. So we need to think about kind of why that's the case, and to do that we should probably look at how this area has changed over time, because as we go into our fieldwork we're going to be looking at how the area is changing now, but we should really think about how the area has been changing over time. So to do that I've got a series of maps to look at how this area has changed, and I'm going to start with a map from 1746. So this map here with this red line outlines the area of King's Cross that we're going to be looking at today. And you'll note from 1746 there wasn't really anything here at all. Okay, it's predominantly farmland. Okay, we had kind of one road running along here, which is actually Euston Road, which is still in existence, still a road, and that's pretty much all there is here. You'll note on here we have got a hospital marked on here, and actually back in 1700s you would cite a hospital away from the main centre of population because of infectious disease and everything. So it actually tells you that we're outside the boundaries of what was kind of London at that time. Moving on to 1862, you'll note there's been a big change. So still looking at this red line around the area, you'll notice that there's been a big infrastructure change, and what we've got is the coming of the railways. So I've already hinted to the aspect the railways had in this, but by 1862 the Industrial Revolution is in full swing. We've got big industry going on, we've got railways coming into London, two major railway stations here, and we've got the canals, which you can see, and these weird circles that you can see here are gas holders, which were where gas was stored, and we'll have a look at some gas holders and talk about what's happened to that a bit later on. And you'll notice the amount of housing has just increased hugely. That tells you about population expansion that London was undergoing during the Industrial Revolution. But what now we've looked at kind of the past and what this area is like, we think about how has it changed from 1862, because actually what we think about is how this area has changed. So we need to use our kind of geography minds to think about what happened. So we're going to be looking and thinking about the terms deindustrialisation. So the idea that we're quite close to central London, you had trains coming in bringing goods, you had coal coming in, and you had other goods coming in, you had industrial landscaping. Now, over time, the way in which industrialisation works, it became larger scale, more efficient. You had boats bringing in goods from all over the world on big container ships, the idea of containerisation. Railways were used less to move goods around, canals were certainly used less to bring goods around as the road network improved, and therefore you had less use of the railways for goods, less use of the canals for goods as well. And actually what happened was the industry moved out of the King's Cross area and went to kind of coastal ports and also to other countries as well, that idea of deindustrialisation. So that had an impact on the local area. Part of what we need to think about is what impact that had and how that might lead to our idea of regeneration. So we talked about regeneration being the need to change an area or re-image it or rebrand it. So with the lack of industrialisation, those people who worked in those industries were no longer employed in those industries. There was less money coming into the area. That had a knock-on effect. So we had essentially, if people lost their jobs, they couldn't afford to spend as much money in the local economy. The local economy got less well off. Less people wanted to move into the area. As less people wanted to move into the area, then more people might have moved away. The economy would have struggled more. Maybe actually things like crime rate might have increased because people wanted to were living in quite poor circumstances. And that idea is a spiral of decline. The idea that once the area started going into that spiral, one thing leads to another and it just gets more and more deprived. So we've talked about that idea of deprivation, and we should probably think about how we can measure that. Well, we can actually look and do some primary data collection for that, but we've talked a bit about secondary data as well. So to kind of give us a bit of background to our fieldwork, what I've got here is the indices of multiple deprivation for the King's Cross area. And what you can see, this is from 2015, what you can see here is we've got these indicators which indicate how deprived the area is on a scale from most deprived to least deprived across the whole of England. And what you'll notice is that the overall average total deprivation is towards the most deprived. And you'll note that things like education is towards the middle, but certain things like barriers to housing and services and living environment are actually quite low down on the scale. So that gives us a bit of an idea about what challenges there were in 2015. Now, this area has undergone huge change.
It was, wasn't it?
And what we'll do in a second is we'll have a talk about those changes that have happened.
Anything about compassion.
So the changes that have happened are when you think about why those changes happened. So we'll talk about the area being quite deprived, and obviously the government are taking note of those statistics, and we want people to consider the governmental aspect to regeneration, but there's also economic, environmental and social aspects to regeneration. And the economic aspect to regeneration in this area is that deindustrialisation, but also the change in economic activity. So one of the big things that changed in this area was the coming of the high-speed 1 rail line to St Pancras and the redevelopment of King's Cross Station and St Pancras Station. Now, with that coming in, there's a change and shift in the type of economy that's going on in that area, and it's moving from that kind of industrialisation which had declined to actually starting to bring people in, high-speed connections to other parts of London. You can get from Stratford International to St Pancras in about 8 minutes. That's how I got into this area this morning. Nice and easy, nice and quick, so it's able to move people around a lot more. But the other impact of that is that as the high-speed rail link was built, there were a huge amount of money was brought into the area, land was built up, and that land was redeveloped, and there was a master plan developed that looked at how this area could be improved. And what they did was they looked at the deprivation, where we've seen barriers to housing and services was poor, they looked at living environment and saw that was poor, and that regeneration that's taken place has been changing what has been going on in this area, and has been kind of driving the changes. And what we're going to do is look at how things have changed since that 2015 deprivation score, how things have changed since that industrialisation and and we'll be doing those primary data collection techniques. But what I've just done here is just giving you kind of like a brief run through of the area, the history of the area, looked at some looked at some secondary data, and talked about how this area might be changing. It's all very well and good for me to say that. What we need to do is actually go and do some field work and see how that is changing, which is what we'll be doing next.